Hello and welcome to EDHREC's Upping the Average, where we take a commander's average decklist as compiled by the data on EDHREC and make some swaps to it to help take it from a good start to a great one. Please come in and sit down. I hope you're hungry. Gyome Master Chef is a 4-mana 5/3 troll warlock with trample who makes sure all our guests are well fed. For every non-token creature who sits down at our table, he'll give us a food token on the end step. As a great bonus, he can use the food to give any creature indestructible and tap it since it's nice and full. This is a great way to keep our creatures alive, or even to tap down potential enemy attackers and blockers. Gyome's EDHREC page looks delicious. Lots of Eldraine cards make an appearance here, like Fiends at the Feast, ready to gorge themselves on what we know is going to be a sumptuous meal. Let's therefore get Gyome's average deck list from the average deck feature and import it to the Architect deck building website. Remember that, as always, any swaps we make to this deck must either keep the total price of the deck cost neutral or else help lower the total price of the overall deck. Okay, it's time for dinner! We have a lot of creatures trying to get into Gyome's restaurant, don't we? Some bring their own food tokens to the potluck, and some are ready to gobble up those morsels. We're even seeing some new cards from Modern Horizons 2 already showing up in his data, from the insane Tireless Provisioner to the awesome Academy Manufactor. Of the utmost importance are the cards that help us turn our innocuous food tokens into a genuinely significant problem for our opponents. We're flexible here. We can assemble a big army that is extremely difficult for our opponents to remove by using food to give them indestructible. With token doubling cards, that gets especially saucy. However, we can also find ways of weaponizing our food. Some of the cards on our list help us turn the life we gain from food tokens into life drain. Better yet, some of these take huge advantage of the fact that our food are in fact artifacts. My personal favorite are the cards that just like to eat a ton of food at once, helping us sacrifice our permanents and rewarding us in spades. Real quick though, can we all just acknowledge how it's a huge flavor fail that we can't play the card Chef's Kiss in this deck? Such a shame. Now, I'm not one to tell a chef how to cook, but I do have a few ingredients that I still think Gyome should look into for breakfast, lunch, and for dinner. I'm pretty hungry, so we're gonna dive right into breakfast. It's the most important meal of the day, and it helps us get started for whatever new thing awaits us. Speaking of which, let's talk about some new cards. I'm going to keep this section short. We've had some cards from Modern Horizons 2 show up in Gyome's deck so far, but we haven't had enough of them just yet. So I like the card Fey Offering here. It doesn't seem all too tough a condition to hit, and the reward is plentiful, a lovely breakfast spread. Then there's the card Timeless Witness. This is just a great effect to have on a creature that Gyome wants to feed for sure. If Eternal Witness is in the deck already, Timeless Witness is happy to join it, and to help us get back stuff like our token doubling spells. However, I'm also going to make a cut here. The first thing that I've got to toss out of this deck is this card right here, Feed the Swarm. I know it says feed on it, so okay, kudos for flavor, but a Golgari deck does not need this card whatsoever. Use black's creature kill effects if you want to kill creatures. Use any of green's amazing artifact and enchantment removal options out there if that's what you're trying to get rid of, but don't use this sorcery speed card. Mono black, Dimir, Rakdos, and Grixis really like this spell to help them remove enchantments because those colors struggle with removing that card type, but Golgari decks categorically do not struggle with that and do not need this. Now, before moving on, real quick, I want to address the land count. 33 is a low land count, like much lower than I'd usually be comfortable with in other decks. I am going to leave it here though, and here's why. The deck is brimming with mana dorks. I counted at least 14 mana acceleration sources in this deck, and most of them are 2 mana or less. Mana rocks don't always show up in green decks because green has spells to do it instead, but here they're really funny because they can sometimes give us extra benefits in unexpected ways since our deck manipulates artifacts so well. And of course, mana dorks are great for Gyome because they each come with food tokens, so he loves their help. This is a pretty risky land count, so make sure that you're careful about it. I wouldn't be surprised if other Gyome players feel that 33 lands is way too low, even if there are a bunch of mana dorks in the deck. Gyome needs to consider his mana base carefully, so this may become a matter of personal comfort with the deck once you've gotten enough rounds with it under your belt. That's all for our first section. Breakfast is an important meal, but lunchtime is when things get a bit meatier. I don't know about you, but there's only one thing I'm craving for lunch. I want us to focus on card advantage. I'm gonna critique some of the food cards we have here. Giant Skewer can make food, but only when the equipped creature is able to hit another creature. This makes the effect awkward to me. I feel like we could just play more creature cards that will come with their own food tokens instead. This just looks tough to reliably generate the food that we want. Sorry, Skewer, one sympathizes. In exchange, can we get a Return of the Wild Speaker in here? It's a pump for the team, or it lets us draw usually around like 5 cards. That's a great rate. Highly recommend. Next, Vraska. I like the ideas here. She can sacrifice our foods for card draw, but I just don't think she's consistent enough to make it work, unfortunately. And while the ultimate is really nice, we all know by now that the ultimate ability of a Planeswalker is hard to pull off in EDH, so we shouldn't rely too heavily upon it. However, even if we're losing her, I do think it's still important for us to have a sacrifice outlet for our food tokens. They can sacrifice themselves, and our commander is also a sacrifice outlet, but that all still costs mana. When we drop a card like Marionette Master or Mazarek, we want to be able to sacrifice our foods basically at will. Along that vein, and while still searching for card advantage effects that will help keep Gyome's supplies fully stocked, I propose to add the card Kesket to this deck. Sack some food, search for some cards. It's a pretty good engine, and he even comes with his own sack lunch. Alright, I hope you've saved some room, because now it's time for the main course. For dinner, we shall serve an elaborate 8-course dining experience to help us weaponize our tokens to sheer simmering perfection. That's right, it's an all-out food fight. Gyome came from the Witherbloom precon, which uses life gain as a means to defeat enemies. Some of these options, like Bogbeast and Sanguine, are really good payoffs for life gain. However, I think the current list still leans a little too far into life gain as a payoff. That was Willow Dusk's thing, but I think Gyome needs to distance himself from the yoke of the precon. He's not a sous chef, he's the head chef. There are 5 cards in this list that I believe came from the Witherbloom precon that I think we can clear out to make room for more impressive win condition cards. As a root, for instance, makes our creatures cheaper, but a lot of them are pretty affordable already. It turns out that this card just isn't a huge boon for our deck. Sproutback Trudge is a big creature that can resummon itself, but it's just kind of awkward timing all around, and frankly, it requires a pretty high life gain demand for just one big creature. Trudge Garden I like in Trostani decks, but not so much here. Assuming we use food for these, that's 4 mana to get a 4/4. I'm just not in love with that rate. Noxious Gearhulk I was surprised to find myself cutting, but it too just doesn't impress me here. I love it in decks that can revive it, or blink it, or double its enter the battlefield effect somehow, but I don't think this is one of those decks, and we have other removal and life gain options coming once we cut this card to make some more room. Finally, Vane Witch Coven. I wanna like it, but sadly I just don't. Black can get back creatures from the graveyard a lot more easily than this. This ability can be more difficult to trigger than it looks, and there are a lot of spells out there that would get back creatures a lot more reliably, and some of them even cheat those creatures right into play instead of just putting them into our hand. Alright, those were the cuts, but now what are we adding? First, remember that cranial plating in the main list? This is hilarious because it makes our artifacts into a huge pump for Gyome to dish out commander damage. The new Nettle Cyst is therefore right up our alley. From what I currently see, this appears to be an affordable card. If not, though, wait for some budget honorable mentions in a moment. Assuming this is an affordable card, I definitely like doubling up our combat equipment abilities a lot here. Moving in a different direction, here's a card that has really impressed me in Gyome decks, Rampage of the Clans. What a fascinating and unexpected way to turn food into something lethal. I've seriously seen this card make like 20 tokens on the caster's side of the field before. It dismantles important enemy cards too, including Mana Rocks, which is sure to set our opponents back. This card can change the landscape of the game in a way that our opponents will definitely not see coming. Next, I remember all those cards like Disciple that trigger when our artifacts die, and since our food are artifacts, that's just such a clever way to do artifact aristocrats. In that same vein, I gotta shout out Nadir's Nightblade as a great dinner guest. This card doesn't say creature token, it says any token. Sneaky, sneaky. And lastly, this main dish is expensive, but man is this funny. Apex Altasaur. Look, I know it's 9 mana, but y'all, I just cannot help myself. In response to its fight ability, we can give this creature indestructible by sacrificing a food token, and then it can fight forever. Each creature it fights will trigger the Enrage, and it can fight again. We can clear out every single enemy creature in the diner, and if need be, it can happen again. This thing is outlandish. It's expensive to cast, let's be honest. Maybe my eyes are bigger than my stomach here, but in my opinion, this synergy is too hilarious not to try out. Now those were the cuts, but let's finish off with some dessert in the form of honorable mentions. If you're building this deck more on a budget, here are some ideas. There are 4 cards in the deck that total to over $100, so you cut the cost of the deck in half if you ignore them. Here are some budget-friendly cards that I'd suggest looking into instead to keep the deck spicy. Underhanded Design is a clever card that further drains our enemies for all of our artifacts. This is just another means to nickel and dime our enemies in mischievous ways. I also really like the Foundation Breaker card from the new Modern Horizons set. Even if we evoke it, we're taking out some important artifact or enchantment and we'll still get a food from it. It's a small thing, but interaction like that can make a big difference. If you're looking for some extra card draw, I would also recommend Idol of Oblivion here. It's kinda small, but we're pretty consistently making tokens, and the card draw is pretty nice to have. And finally, I was, shall we say, inspired to suggest the card King Makar too. Gyome can manually tap his Royal Highness Makar, so on our turn he'll untap and exile something. It's slow, but it's effective, and it will leave our opponents asking, dude, where's Makar? If instead you're feeling decadent and want to splurge on this deck, here are some ideas for future upgrades. First, I expect that lifting a budget restriction means the suite of mana dorks gets more and more sophisticated. More 1-drops like birds and friends will probably fill up the deck since every 1-mana creature effectively becomes a gilded goose. Some of the more expensive creatures like Herald of Anguish or Penguin Marauder may therefore find themselves slipping out of the deck as things tune up and Gyome gets a bit more streamlined. I think a few other cards like Forbidden Fruit or Putrefy may also fall out of favor as things tune up as well, and end up making room for some very exciting morsels indeed. There's of course a card like Doubling Season, which just like Parallel Lives, will double the food output of our deck. It's possible that some Gyome players might also reach for Exquisite Blood to pair with the other cards in the deck already to create that infamous combo and win right on the spot. But as a personal favorite, I'd like to recommend looking into Witch of the Moors. This is a life gain payoff I really like, and a creature recursion effect that I think is more exciting than the Vanewitch Coven we cut earlier, especially because it's also fun removal. You find all types of folks at Guillaume's restaurant. P.S. If you really love spicy recipes and want to take this commander in a completely different direction, this is absolutely the ultimate theme deck. You can make this a rat colony deck and recreate the entire plot of Ratatouille. Alright, that should do it. This is definitely a Michelin star restaurant. You can find the menu, deck list, in the description below with the cuts in the maybe board. I hope you enjoyed your meal, and if you'd like to leave a review for this restaurant to let your fellow diners know about your favorite of Guillaume's recipes, make sure you do so below. Thanks for stopping by Guillaume's, and we'll see you again soon.